Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first discussion round by the Southeast Europe Association in 2026, covering one of the last major events taking place in the region in 2025. Kosovo held elections on 28 December, roughly a year after the last elections in February 2025. In between these two elections, the country saw months of deadlock in government formation, months which were lost for the country with regard to progress on important reform issues. However, when voters returned to the ballot box in December, they seemed to speak what looks like a very clear verdict about who they blame for this deadlock and from where they expect progress in the coming months on the country's most pressing issues. If this is really what happened, what the most important issues are and what to expect in the coming weeks will be the focus of our discussion today. And I'm very glad that I'm joined by a very great panel to do this, and I would like to welcome very warmly Donika Emini, who is a research fellow at the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz and also a member of the BiEPAG, the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Groups, and joins us from Graz tonight. Hello, Donika.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And I'm also happy to welcome Miodrag Milićević, who is Executive Director of the NGO AKTIV, who joins us tonight from Mitrovica. Hello, Miodrag.
Hello, so from my side, very glad actually to join the discussion.
And last but surely not least, I would like to welcome Lulzim Peci, who is Executive Director of the Kosovar Institute for Policy Research and Development, who joins us from Pristina. Hello, Lulzim.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
So the idea is that we are going to discuss for about 60 minutes to have a discussion within the panel. And after this, we will open up for the audience to fill in your questions that you can put in the Q&A section in written. So whenever a question comes to your mind, make sure that you write it there so we can pick it up as soon as the open part starts. Before we start with this open part, we're going to discuss in the panel, and I would like to start in the first round to have a look at the election results and what's actually been going on in 2025 in Kosovo. And I would like to start with you, Donika, and would like to ask you to give us an overview or a wrap-up of what actually happened in the time between the elections in February 2025 and December 2025, and what did people accredit to these developments, to the governments, to the opposition, and how does it explain the results we saw?
Thanks a lot for the question. Happy to join you and, of course, be among friends and colleagues. Well, I mean, you cannot look at the results, you cannot analyze the results of December 28 without looking at the February 9 elections. These two processes are very much linked to each other. Everybody was expecting Vetëvendosje to win. This was without a doubt. No one saw the magnitude of this victory. This victory is definitely something that we didn't predict, and there are a number of reasons to believe that the 2021 results wouldn't be able to be replicated by Kurti. First, the February 9 elections sort of send a message that Kosovo has been back to its political chaos. By this, I mean it's a multi-party system in which no party would secure dominance the way that Vetëvendosje secured in 2021, right? And the elections in February showed that the opposition has had a positive trajectory because both had improved, and by both I mean PDK and LDK had improved their results, and AAK pretty much stays where it is, and there was basically not a huge difference, although they were running with coalition in February. The second one was, of course, the fact that Vetëvendosje was not running as a party from the opposition. It was running as after 4 years in governance, which were not the best years. I mean, obviously, Kurti had been demystified to a certain extent, and he couldn't be talking from this very comfortable position of the opposition like he did before. And then, of course, the third one would be the international factor. I mean, being under the EU measures and also having, the strategic dialogue with the US suspended in 2025, This would have been like a huge, in the past, it would have been a huge sort of reason for a party to be punished in the elections, which wasn't the case. So we should look at these factors for sure. What happened in 2025 was that Vetëvendosje strategically played the game. The party has been in campaigning throughout the year, whether for local elections or the general elections that they knew they were going to happen. Kurti was the one that was prepared and campaigning. He was also in a good position because he was leading the caretaker government. And during this time, Kurti has been taking specific decisions using the Kosovo budget, but campaigning with it, because during this time there was certain policies which look quite leftist, which would go with his profile as a leftist politician, to target the students, to target the retirees, to target young mothers and childcare support. So basically, during this time, a series of decisions has been taken, targeting these very, very vulnerable parts of society in order to sort of gain more popularity. On the other hand, Kurti always had the North card, which he didn't use much during 2025, because during this time there was a peaceful transition of power to Serbian mayors, and that part has been used quite a lot in February, but not much during this time. What Kurti did during this time was that I don't think he was a strategist. I think the opposition sort of, made this happen to Kurti's surprise as well, the blockade which happened in a very, very unprecedented way. The opposition knew that the only thing they had against Kurti was the numbers to block him. But they didn't block him for the government, which would have been very much okay. They blocked Vetëvendosje in electing the speaker of the parliament, which then turned the parliament into a charade. Because for 50 times we tried to elect the speaker of the parliament, opposition basically had no viable reason to say no or to refuse a certain candidate. They just, were going without strategy, blocking Kurti where it shouldn't be blocked. And instead of holding the elections early, they waited for December. And December, what happens? December 28th is holidays. Diaspora comes to Kosovo because it's holidays, and this amplifies Kurti's win. So the real result of Kurti would have been the result of February, but the amplified one is the one of December 28th with diaspora as a card. So I think that it was a combination of Kurti using the year strategically, capturing the institutions, taking decisions that were in his favor by using the Kosovo budget. But it was also the opposition being completely without strategy. If you look at the opposition, and here I will wrap up, the opposition was completely unprepared. PDK went throughout leadership change, but even before that, it was still, the reforms were kind of taking place, but in a slow way, in a very questionable way, because of the divisions within the party. PDK has been constantly clung into this past with KLA, and sort of waiting for Hashim Thaçi to return from The Hague, which is future. But in terms of present, they really did not offer anything to the voter, not even the Gen Z voter, which I think the opposition has sort of lost it there. And LDK has been, of course, like a target now. Asking Lumir Abdijigu to even resign is an easy target, but they didn't win elections since 2004. The party has been clearly having a lot of issues internally, and the reforms did not take place fast enough for the party to regain itself. Lumir Abdijigu, unfortunately, has not been a politician who would be super active in people's faces and minds and present. He missed out many of the parliamentary sessions. He was there only when he spoke. He was not hands-on. He didn't roll up his sleeves to re-energize the party. And of course, this sort of backfired. All this blockage, which was unfair by Vetëvendosje, because they had the responsibility to form the institutions, because they were the winning party, somehow strategically were attributed to the opposition, and the opposition paid the price for the blockade. And lastly, the international card that I mentioned before. Kurti has been under EU measures while campaigning, and also has been suspended by the US, the strategic dialogue. In the past, this would have been like detrimental for a leader. Now, it doesn't matter. So we have to look at how Kurti managed to somehow change psychologically the voter in Kosovo for the fact that international relations do not matter anymore when the voters decide. So it is a lot of lessons learned that the opposition should take from these elections, from these results, and use this time to actually calibrate themselves very well for the next elections. Because with this result, Kurti actually has also the president in a position in his pocket. Because he sent a clear message to the opposition that new elections wouldn't be good for you, because if we fail to elect the president in March, we will go to early elections, and this will not be good for very weak opposition. And second, in his victory speech, which was better than calling him Hagemann in February, now he was more mature, but he sent a message that he views opposition only numerically. Only numbers matter. So he mentioned specifically the budget, the growth plan, and the president in his interview to sort of show the opposition one thing, that numerically they have to support Kurti, otherwise it will be detrimental politically for them. So short term, the deadlock is gone. We will have institutions, and this is good news because we will talk about reforms and all. Long term, we have to see how Kosovo can learn how to navigate with this new sort of setup, political setup, in which in a multi-party system, one party dominates and dominates big time.
Thank you very much, Donika. That was really rich, and we're going to come back to a couple of these points also in later rounds. But for now, you mentioned the strategic use of the budget by Kurti, the lack of strategy of the opposition, and the blockage of him at a point where he shouldn't be blocked. Lulzim, what is your perspective on this? Do these points explain the results, or what also did matter in the elections?
More or less, yes, but there are some other things. First of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that opposition in Kosovo lost 80,000 votes in on December 28th in comparison to February 9th. So this is a huge loss. And those votes have been lost, were mainly the votes of in Kosovo. So this tells a lot that it tells a lot about the opposition in Kosovo. And actually, in my opinion, the opposition right now is in disarray, and they don't know how to respond strategically to the victory of Albin Kurti. And this is not good for Kosovo, because having a weak opposition, it's not promising for the democracy and for the independence of institutions in the country. The second issue here that we have to acknowledge is that Kurti basically won with sovereignist and nationalistic vocabulary and narrative, which is very appealing, especially to diaspora, but then to many people in Kosovo. And this is and at the end, I must stress, a cherry on the cake came for him. And this is good for Kosovo, I must stress, because the EU measures have been suspended few days before the elections, partially suspended few days before the elections of 20th of December. So the narrative, the momentum which has been built for Kurti was fantastic. So I am a strong man, and Europe surrenders in front of me. I'm sovereignist, protecting the country, and this kind of vocabulary, which was very appealing for people who are not very much involved in the politics of Kosovo, because the politics in the country is run via headlines and not by the substance. So we are living right now here, as elsewhere in the world, in post-truth environment. and working in this environment is specialty of Kurti, because he has a fantastic social media apparatus, and he's very well organized at grassroots level, and the huge distinction between Kurti and the other parties is that Kurti has activists on the field, and the other parties do have functionaries in the field, and this is a huge distinction. So I think that well, there are a lot of challenges in front of us right now, but the good news is that we will have institutions in place. But the first challenge in establishing institutions is the presidency of the Parliament of Kosovo. In the presidency, we are supposed to have, according to the constitution, an MP who represents the majority of Serbian non-majority. There is a case in the Constitutional Court of Kosovo. We don't have verdict yet, but I think that it might be very helpful to get that verdict as soon as possible. So, and here is the trick, because if Lista Srpska is not permitted to have the seat in the presidency of the parliament, then basically we will have problems, huge problems with the legality of the constitution of our parliament. The second issue will come with the election of the government. The votes are there, but the issue that will appear again is the election of a minister from Serbian community. And again, according to our constitution and laws, this, based on the current election results, this minister is supposed to come from Lista Srpska. So this is the second challenge. I don't see other challenges until we come to the point of election of president. And I think that Kurti has all cards in his pocket. And I am not seeing Vjosa Osmani necessarily continuing to be the president of the country. It depends from Kurti. Does he need her as a competitor and, let's say, partner at the same time? Or he doesn't need her at all? So this will determine her fate. So Vjosa Osmani will not determine her fate, but Kurti's interest will determine her fate. And there are some names which have been mentioned to become president instead of her, so, but we'll see. These are just rumors. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lulzim. Thank you very much for the points on the Srpska lista, and we will continue on them with Miodrag soon. But just one follow-up question, as both of you already spoke about it, like having the government as a done deal. So how will the next steps now actually look like? Because Kurti doesn't have the absolute majority in parliament, obviously. When will the government be formed, Lulzim, and who will be part of this majority? Can you give us like a short wrap-up of this situation?
Yeah, but Kurti will get votes from the other non-majority MPs. They are 10, and 8 of them for sure will vote for him, so he will have sufficient numbers to create the government. I'm not seeing problems in electing the Speaker of the Parliament. I see a legal problem with the election of the presidency of the Parliament. I don't see any problem in electing the new government. I see a legal problem when it comes to the appointment of a minister from Serbian community. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. And when will it be elected? Is that already clear?
Well, once the results are certified, I hope that they will be up to the end of next week. Then the president has to convene the inauguration session of the parliament, and in that session, the presidency should be elected. I don't see any problems right now. I mentioned a legal problem with Lista Srpska, with Serbian community. And after that, Kurti will have 15 days to propose the new government. So that's it.
Okay.
So basically, we are talking, I think that until mid-February, we can have a new government.
Okay. Thank you, Lulzim. Miodrag, let's continue with a view from the north and how the Serb communities perceive the election results, and also the position of Srpska Lista towards the results and also towards the new Kurti government and ideas of cooperating with it.
Yeah, thank you very much once again. Of course, I mean, I've been carefully listening, Donika and Luli, of course, and there is a lot more basically to say, not only about, of course, what has been said already, of course, about Kurti using the stated resources basically during the pre-election campaign, during the election campaign, I'm sorry, with a kind of, sort of mirroring something which already actually have emerged in Serbia by the ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, actually using exactly the model actually that was obviously applied there, using the state's resources basically to pay the students, of course, to pay the pensioners, to give the extra money, etc., etc. So I see a lot of similarities basically when it comes, of course, to exactly what happened actually, what Donika have described basically how that happened in Kosovo already. Of course, this is from Kosovo perspective, from Kosovo point of view, maybe from Srpska Lista, of course, we could hear obviously some voices from within Srpska Lista. This is not a good news whatsoever. Of course, I mean, they've been hoping to another results. They've been hoping very much, of course, to have the opposition parties to somehow get not the absolute majority, but to get into the position, of course, to have a kind of, sort of the better perspective in terms of partnering with the future possible, of course, government. This is actually the hope the Srpska Lista obviously had. However, of course, the people have spoken, obviously. We have clearly election results. We have a clear numerical, if I may say so, of course, outcome of these elections, both for Kosovo Albanian political parties, but also when it comes to Kosovo Serb community. So now is the way forward, actually, how are we going to move forward with this? Julia absolutely perfectly described what is actually ahead of us. This is one of the obstacles, basically, or better to say challenges he described that is very much real. And to be frank with you, and we have already a pending complaints of Srpska Lista towards the Constitutional Court of Kosovo in terms of the elections of the Deputy Assembly Speaker when it comes to the last actually parliamentary elections. The verdict is still to be announced, so we don't have that, of course, just yet in place. But what is the good news, if I step back, of course, is at least the active political participation of the Kosovo Serb community. Frankly speaking, we have also, as I said, a clear numerical outcome, which means Srpska Lista won almost absolute majority, of course. One seat goes to the former Minister Rašić, of course. When I said former, of course, we don't know what will happen actually in the new government. However, having in mind that Kurti already put in favor Mr. Rašić as his own choice, and the choice actually that is absolutely the only one viable for the Vetëvendosje and himself personally, it will be very difficult to imagine that Kurti this time, of course, breached this policy and absolutely by the book, of course, and by the law, of course, offers the seats to Srpska Lista, which is absolutely a challenge. Number one, how we're gonna all actually act upon this kind of decision, which is very much predictable, of course, in front of us. This is the challenging for everyone, and I have underlined this in so many other previous discussions. Where is actually the bottom line of acceptance? Double standards. I have to say these double standards because Kurti was the one actually that was promoting the policy actually of respecting the law by the book. However, we've been witnessing, particularly when it comes to the elections, that not really everything is by the book. Because the previous elections, by electing the Deputy Assembly Speaker, it was exactly the breach of the constitutional policy, of course, which ended up, of course, with the complaints of Srpska Lista towards the Constitutional Court of Kosovo. So this is something which is, of course, ahead of us, and to kind of, manage the angle, it is very much now interesting to see how the Kosovo Serb participation actually will be treated. Is it going to be just a technical checkbox, tick the box policy, of course, or is it going to be a genuine participation, as everyone was really hoping very much that Srpska Lista, of course, this time will be much more active, much more cooperative, etc., etc. Frankly, again, politically speaking, it is very difficult to imagine, and this is an unwanted coalition by both sides. Neither Kurti wants Srpska Lista, nor Srpska Lista wants Kurti. Kurti already have clearly mentioned that anything that could somehow contribute to normality will be the Radojicic, of course, which is kind of in the middle, of course, all the time floating in the air. Banjska and Radojicic, of course, this is a kind of the first step, that could be acceptable and that might be acceptable to Vetëvendosje and Kurti himself. But on the other hand, actually, Srpska Lista is very much against it, of course, and they don't want even to speak when it comes to not even Radojicic, but not about Banjska, and absolutely a different sort of perception. So this is yet another challenge, as I said. So all in all, we may end up again having Srpska Lista almost in the opposition, not being the active participant, of course, not the active political player within the future government of Kosovo, but rather being in the opposition, of course, which is again in contradiction, of course, with the applicable legislation in Kosovo. So I suspect, of course, if Mr. Racic takes over the position or reassume the same position in the future, that this is going to be a point of absolutely struggle between Srpska Lista, constant struggle, of course, of the Srpska Lista to manage expectations versus the reality, of course, which is going to emerge in Kosovo. And then, of course, the international community is very much important. It's a third factor, the interesting party. How actually the international community perceives this and how they're going to actually push both sides to become more constructive rather being a constant opposition towards each other, in expense to the progress of Kosovo and communities improvement of the international relations, of course, between the communities. So to summarize somehow, the real question is actually whether the future government of Kosovo will be somehow the power, of course, and the majority Kurti got will be used actually to consolidate institutions and rebuild trust, as it was failed actually at the latest stage between February, of course, and December last year, of course, or it's going to further centralize the power and manage diversity through the legal formalism. So this is a kind of bigger question to me, so in between those two, and this is we are all about to witness this, of course, how the Kurti will proceed further, and to what extent Kosovo Serbs, of course, will ultimately, of course, respect the election results, but also the position of Srpska Lista within the future government, or they will be seeking more opportunities, of course, for engagements and to become rather a constructive player, of course, in the future, of course, when it comes to the governments of Kosovo.
Thank you, Miodrag. Just a very brief follow-up. As you said that Mr. Racic could potentially remain as minister and therefore fulfill this prerequisite from the constitution, but he could not be the vice president of parliament, obviously, at the same time. So I understand that this would then be an important veto position formally that could challenge the legality of the parliament, essentially, right?
Absolutely, you're very much right on that. Of course, I mean, we already had this kind of situation, of course, in last year. So it is obviously part of the consultative process with Kurti before they actually even start with the election process within the electing, of course, the presidency of the parliament, and of course the ministerial seats when they start distribution of the ministerial actually positions among the winning parties and those that are going to be selected, of course, as allies and future partners of the government of Kosovo. So, but this is exactly one of the major challenge, of course, when it comes to the future functionality of the government itself. Needless to mention, the presidential elections will be yet another challenge ahead of us. But again, this is going to be dealt, of course, within these 2.5 months, of course, period ahead of us, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. This already touched a lot on the second round we're going to have now on the domestic challenges we're looking at. Of course, domestic and international is very often intertwined in Kosovo, but for analytical reasons, we're trying to separate the two of them a bit. And Donika, I would like to focus with you a bit on the new government's agenda. And when we look back to the beginning of last year, Kurti had a big list of legislation to be passed before the February elections, the 2025-27 legislative program with, I think, more than 100 draft laws. So does it mean now that this will be just taken out of the drawer again and continued where they stopped before this gap year, or what's going to happen?
It's like unfreezing the processes. Well, before I go there, it is I would want to go back to Lista Srpska and because the language towards Lista Srpska has changed. In the latest interview, Kurti was very much mature, and that was also towards the opposition. But he had only like 2 interviews before elections. And in one of them, he did not say, he actually denied that Lista Srpska is a terrorist organization. He actually said it is not. It's a political party. So this is completely different from, his previous narrative that, his government has been building, especially after Banjska, and was, of course, there was there was legitimate reasons to think so, especially due to the fact that Radojicic was also Lista Srpska. And, it took a while for the party to actually detach from him and his figure. The second one is that, I wouldn't really predict a big blockage in the deputy speaker of the parliament, because Kurti just used that strategically to win more time. Kurti knew that December would want to be, we all knew there would be snap elections, but Kurti aimed for December, at the end of December. And after, the opposition said, okay, we're going to win, you win, we're going to vote for, your candidate for a speaker, it needed an administrative bureaucratic burden to actually delay the process, because there was local elections and there was December that, he was anticipating, because December is not only diaspora, but it's closer to the presidential elections, which, strategically would be very well calculated. So I think that, now this, would run smoothly, because, you cannot win more than this. Or you can, I don't know, because now I'm afraid to say anything that might, prove me wrong. The second one is the media debates and the opposition towards Kurti. When you listen to Miodrag, Kurti is like, this very, a leader to be feared. What opposition did during the whole period is that, they wanted to sort of frame Kurti as a pro-Serb, to be honest. The entire narrative was like, you have made concessions, you have accepted the association, you have done the following, because of you, the Serbs in the north are allowed to travel with visa-free regime, with documents issued by the parallel institutions. So basically, the framing of the opposition was completely different. And the other mistake the opposition was making during this time is that, they were just, trying to prove that Kurti is as bad as them. Not, we offer this and this is how we move forward. But like, look, Kurti has done this and that. These are the corruption scandals. These are the cooperation with the Serbs, because they constantly were using the wiretapping against Mimosa Kusari. And she was just talking to Lista Srpska, which is a, political party in the parliament of Kosovo. So these wiretappings were not, were used, by the opposition and the media against Kurti. So that's why, the pro-Serb sort of element which was very interesting to look at. I mean, Mimosa Kusari just got, now crucified for attending a meeting where all other, political parties in Kosovo were, but Vetëvendosje was the only one that was, being framed and attacked for it. So this is, like very important to see how opposition is losing it. And the media debate is like made sort of Kurti live rent-free in our heads, without even having to appear, because different from other countries, in the region, like you would see Vučić 24/7 on all, like his controlled media and so on, and Edi Rama and Ola. But, Kurti you wouldn't see. He was absent, but he was present by being absent, because all these political debates were obsessed personally with him, and it was like impossible to not feel the frustration from seeing people all the time and not doing opposition, constructive opposition. They were just personal attacks, which was, sometimes even frustrating to look at. And this is like very important. This public debate in Kosovo has to be rebalanced. This polarization has to calm down in order for people who actually have something constructive against Kurti to say, to actually get more voice. So what happens next? Kurti made it clear. The government is not going to be a problem to be formed, and Luli was right. There is always a non-Serbian communities which, even before, without coalition, they say that we are supporting Kurti. So it's a done partnership. So now it's to form the government, vote for the budget, because if you don't vote the budget, if we don't vote for the budget until March, then the entire administration and the state will collapse. Vote for the growth plan. My biggest frustration with the opposition was the fact that they did not vote for the growth plan. Even if that would go in favor of Kurti, who cares? Having asked, like Bedri Hamza from the opposition, he even wrote a letter to von der Leyen, like, lift the measures, while deliberately blocking the vote for the growth plan in the parliament. I mean, this is bipolar. So not voting for the growth plan was actually the frustration that we all felt, because, this is a matter of national interest. This is not Kurti's interest. Kurti has, the government led by Kurti has drafted a very well planned, very well organized plan, which was praised by the EU, approved by the EU. All we needed was to ratify it in the parliament and start implementing reforms. And this was a strategic mistake by the opposition. So by voting for the growth plan, we can resume not only the legislative agenda, which was actually very poor last time. Kurti was like, although having like the majority in the parliament, was very slow in implementing legislative agenda. Then also start, because the grace period was too long for Kosovo, starting implementing the growth plan and, getting the first tranche, so we can start, sort of catching up with other countries in the region, because this is very important. During this time, of course, there was a lot of crisis, economic crisis. Although on paper, Kosovo is projected to develop quite well, the trajectory is positive. That's just on paper. The reality on the ground is quite different. And during this time, the private sector has suffered. Also, it will suffer even more, because during this time, Kurti has increased the minimum wage, which is okay for the public sector, but it's gonna be detrimental for the private sector, which is shouldering Kosovo at this point. The second one is, of course, the 13th and 14th salary, which was, of course, loomed on the horizon by Kurti during this time. This is, of course, something that will challenge the private sector in Kosovo. And during this period of time, we had energy crisis, and Kosovo has started this transition of energy, which is something that is on hold. The good news is that the US, although has canceled all the funding for the Western Balkans, Kosovo was not, uniquely targeted in this regard. The MCC project, which is a major energy project, has resumed, and it's up to the government now to move this process forward, which will be very good for the energy situation in the country. And then, of course, we had this discussion before. Kurti always said that I cannot fix education and I cannot fix healthcare sector in one mandate. Well, he got two now, and he will be also held accountable for what he's planning to do with education and healthcare system. A lot, has been loomed on the horizon, has been discussed on what is his plan, and now it is up for the government to actually show results in this regard as well. And of course, domestically, there is also one challenge that we will also talk internationally, because you're right that you cannot decouple these things. But Kurti has, been okay with peaceful transition of power in the northern part of Kosovo. And this is why we got the measures lifted in the first place, partially, and to be lifted fully by the end of January. What is expected from Kurti to do, which is a domestic challenge, is to reintegrate the judicial and the police. And this is something that the EU also has been very blunt about. And this is also related to the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. I'm not talking about the association, because that is, something else. But, to fully reintegrate the Serbs in the north would be a huge challenge. And in this regard, Kurti would need to team up seriously with the EU and EU member states to actually support this process. Because in 2013, when this, Serbs have been integrated in the Kosovo system, it was not done alone. It was done with huge support of the EU. And I believe that it should happen again. And this is also a test for Kurti in the future. We will talk more about international aspect, about the dialogue with Serbia, but internally, these things are, to be tackled first, and also by the EU is also to see what can Kurti do in relation to the membership application.
Thank you very much. Lulzim, if you look at the government agenda, Lulzim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So we got you back here.
Yes.
If you look at the government agenda, what should be the priorities of the government? And we already talked a bit about the potential of the prime minister to blackmail everyone regarding potentially the presidential elections, and to push for an own candidate, or be with a very strong hand now. Would you share this position that the presidential elections won't be that big of a problem for him, because the opposition has now seen that new elections would be difficult, and that Vetëvendosje clearly has the upper hand?
Well, if Kurti wants to delay the implementation of the Brussels agreements, he will play with this card. And I think this is what stands behind his behavior during 2025. And this is what stands behind the opposition as well, because they were not ready to create the government, being aware about the international obligations that they have to fulfill. But no one mentioned it. So this was the elephant in the room. And I think that this is still elephant in the room. But it will depend from Kurti. If he wants to buy time, he will move ahead with the new elections, because this might create space for him for the creation of the new government. Well, so we will have elections by 3rd week of April in this case. And then, so most likely, and in the best case, we can have the new government and, if possible, new president by the end of May, in the best case of next year. But this crisis may continue, so it depends a lot from Kurti. It depends a lot from him. And also from the opposition. So I don't know, maybe some of them will say, okay, we elect this or that candidate because we don't want the elections right now. We are in desperate situations, so what we are going to do? I don't think that the new elections are in the interest of opposition, because I think that they can lose more now than they lost on 28th of December, because the momentum of having in front an undefeated leader has been created in Kosovo. And this is similar to the countries in the region as well. So it's nothing unnatural which is happening in Kosovo. So it's more or less we are taking the shape and patterns of the other states in the region in terms of having strong leaders and weaker democracies. So this is my opinion about it. Regarding his agenda, I don't think that he has an agenda, actually. So, but I'm able to name few internal challenges. So the first and foremost will be dealing with the immigration. I think that this is the main security threat, long-term security threat to Kosovo, because in the last 5 years, we have lost 200,000 people. So every year, 40,000 people are emigrating in Europe with work visas. So it's really problematic for us. And this will have a tremendous effect on the potential for economic development. So this is one key factor. The second factor is that these businesses that we are having in Kosovo are moving either to Albania or to North Macedonia. So last year, the enterprises, private enterprises in Kosovo, have invested in Albania 400 million euros, and they became, and Kosovo basically became the main provider, or took the first place actually in foreign direct investments in Albania, and also businesses from Kosovo are moving to North Macedonia. So the country risks to become totally impoverished and dependent on the state budget. And when you get full dependency on the state budget for employment or well-being, then autocracies are able to be established and to run for a long time any country, not only Kosovo, but any country. So I think that this is the second biggest problem. The third thing, which is of crucial importance for the future of democracy in the country, is the Constitutional Court. Because the few members of the Constitutional Court, if I'm not wrong, 2 or 3, the mandate will expire in July. So if Kurti manages to elect his people to become members of the court, then we will lose basically one of the lost guardians of democratic governance in Kosovo. And I see here huge challenges. And of course, situation in the north and implementation of the association is another one. So, and Europe's future and the future, European future and the future of relations with the United States of America will depend on the implementation of Brussels and Ohrid Agreement. So I don't know how Kurti is going to proceed. So here.
Okay. So a lot of politics that also still matter even after the elections now, and I think we can continue also with the external relations in the next round. Before, I would like to give the word again to Miodrag and to focus on the Serb community again. And if you look at the difficult relationship in the last Kurti term between the North and the government, what does the community in the North now expect from the government, and what are the needs of the Serb community there?
Well, as I said, I mean, having in mind the previous experience with Kurti and Vetëvendosje, of course, Serbs are really not happy, actually, with Vetëvendosje getting again, of course, in power. And I need really to remind everyone, of course, that not only that Serbs were not really happy with the performance of the previous government, but also international community had a lot of difficulties, actually, when it comes to the governance of Kosovo. So we didn't really mention the unilateral decisions that the mostly international community, namely the European Union and the US, of course, were not really happy about it. Therefore, some of the measures basically that were partly lifted, of course, nowadays were actually introduced exactly because of that. So I have to really remind every single one of us, of course, about the ban of import of goods from Serbia, for instance, which is still in place partly. you know. So people were saying like, okay, no, that this is now being lifted. No, it is not actually. You know, the only way that the goods were produced in Serbia to enter Kosovo is only via one border crossing point, you know, so which is Merdare for those actually that geographically knows where it is, while the others were absolutely still on prohibited actually entrance points when it comes to the import of Serbian goods and products, of course, to Kosovo. This is not really the goods itself, you know. So according to the Brussels agreement, no development fund has been actually agreed and put in place when it comes to income generation through the imported goods. Of course, that part of those incomes actually should be served through further develop, of course, further investments in development of the Kosovo Serb community, predominantly into the north. Needless to mention that some of us were actually advocating that those generated funds will be actually used also for the Kosovo Serb and other non-majority communities throughout Kosovo, not exclusively under the north. But that was the agreement of Brussels, of course. Everything now has been actually on off list, you know, everything frozen. None of these things were actually are existing at the moment. So if we want really to move forward, I have a very little hope, but let's put little hope that to prevail, you know, for the future government. Vetëvendosje significantly has to recalibrate their position and their policy, of course, towards the non-majority community, particularly when it comes to the Kosovo Serb community. Second, recalibration needs to happen actually when it comes to the dialogue. And this is not only Serbs, this is also the international community that invested quite a lot when it comes to the dialogue, in preserving or nurturing the dialogue between those two sides, including the Kosovo Serb community, which now for more than 2 years is basically stalled. It is not really moving forward, and it's very uncertain where we're going to move forward and how we're going to actually have a constructive, participation of both sides when it comes to the dialogue process. Of course, I'm not going to have my position now saying that part of my frustrations actually when it comes to the dialogue process, this is not a topic today. But at least, you know, if you want to see the stability and meaningful participation, engagements in the participation of the Kosovo Serb community, it is exactly what is needed at this point of time for the future government. So that means actually that the future Kosovo government, which means Kurti, has to honestly reposition the Vetëvendosje's policies, of course, in the policy of his government in the future when it comes to Kosovo Serb community. And the third factor is the functionality of the Kosovo government. For those who are not familiar, the two major offices, of the Office of Community Affairs and the Office of Language Commissioners, Language Commissioner's Office, I'm sorry, they're both dysfunctional. The two vital and the most important mechanisms, they don't function, they don't serve non-majority communities in Kosovo. Not only Serbs, non-majority communities. This has to change. So those three things, of course, and then, of course, on the top of it, as an annex to it, we need really to see progress. Donika rightly mentioned the international community is expecting basically of course, integration of the judges and prosecutors. This is a totally separate topic, but it will contribute, obviously, to a stability of Kosovo and stability of relations with Kosovo Serb community. And the second one will be the most challenging sector, the security, when it comes to the reintegration of the police, which is strongly denied, of course, refused by the Kurti and by Mr. Svečna, of course, the probably future, again, Minister of Interior, reintegration of the Kosovo police. We didn't mention, there was a positive aspect, of course, of the Kosovo Serb participation in local elections. We have a peaceful transition, obviously, of course, happening. However, in the future will be yet another challenge when the mayors, according to the Brussels agreement, of course, in the north, will propose the station commanders, of course, to the Ministry of Interior, of course, of Kosovo, whether this is going to be accepted or not. So we have all these smaller sectors basically are kind of pockets of crisis actually that could be reactivated or activated or will emerge at some point, you know, sooner or later, that's for sure. So to conclude, I personally would like really to see a very precise plan actually a comprehensive plan of the government of Kosovo. I would like to see prospects actually of Kosovo, particularly when it comes to the non-majority communities, for the next 5 years, clearly mentioning what will be the benefits for the Kosovo Serb and other ethnic minorities, of course, in Kosovo. And this is going to determine future relations, not only of Kosovo Serbs with the government, but also of other non-majority communities, of course, with the future government of Kosovo.
And do you see any kind of obvious first step that the government could make towards the community? Like it was mentioned already that Kurti said that Srpska Lista is a normal party in parliament, which could probably be considered as a step towards the party. But towards the people, is there something obviously that could be done and probably also be easy for the government? I understood now that reintegration of police officers would not be one of those low-hanging fruit, but is there anything that could happen in the next weeks that could also be beneficial for the government's international standing in a way?
If we see future government, of course, of Kosovo, namely Kurti himself, of course, being the leader of that government, more openness and inclusion, openness actually, and the invitation to the Kosovo Serb community to participate in the meetings, in the political processes, offering solutions, asking them for proposals. I could see this as a kind of, bilateral, an inception of bilateral improvement of relations, of course, between Serbs and Albanians, namely of Srpska Lista and Kurti. That statement, of course, I haven't seen the statement actually where he was mentioning about Srpska Lista being a political party, not as a terrorist, as Donika mentioned, and so on. But I cannot really judge based on the one single statement. I would really like to see a concrete steps, as I said, because if you follow up and if you read or if you made your reference to the country report of Kosovo, you clearly see where are actually the most challenging areas when it comes to the Kosovo Serb community. And this has to change. If that don't change, of course, if you don't see any sort of way forward in terms of, for instance, lifting the import of goods, of course, measures lifted by Kosovo, we honestly cannot really speak about a real honest approach towards Kosovo Serb community, but rather just a single sole party interest that Serbs will participate in the future government, mainly because of the tick-the-box policies I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Miodrag. I would like to encourage everyone still to put their questions. There are a couple already, but I would like to have before a shorter round on the international challenges ahead. And would like to ask everyone to stick to 3 to 4 minute statements to keep it brief, to have also questions from the audience included. And I would like to start here with Lulzim, and would like to ask you as a security expert about the current situation when it comes to the view from Pristina to Washington, because the entire NATO is now hugely concerned whether or not our security is still guaranteed by Washington. So how do you see the future relationship between the Trump administration and the Kurti government, and in general between Kosovo and the US? And how could we see a lifting of the already suspension of the strategic dialogue that has happened in September last year?
Well, first of all, I think it's good to explain several dimensions of the US policy towards Kosovo, and then to turn to the relations of Kosovo with US. Well, the first thing is that according to US officials, strengthening of the security sector of Kosovo and Kosovo security forces their strategic interest. And this is somehow divided from the political relations that they are having with the Kurti's government. This is one. The second point is that the Trump's government has put out of the table the option of exchange of territories or partition or whatever we can call it. So, and I think that this is very good for political security, not only of Kosovo, but for the entire region. And the third thing is enhancing relations to the level of strategic dialogue, to the resuming of strategic dialogue. And that's it. There is one point there which is very important, and that is that Kosovo should fulfill the obligations of the Brussels and Ohrid Agreement if it wants to resume the strategic dialogue with the US. And this is very important because one day US can change the position regarding Kosovo security force and security, let's say, sector in Kosovo, because they can say, okay, that's fine, but your government is doing wrong. Why I have to support you? Huh? So it's legitimate question. But so far, this is the politics. What makes Kosovo worried, and people are not saying it publicly, it is actually the crisis in relation to Greenland. Because if something unexpected happens, or something that can actually bring to the question the existence of NATO and its cohesion, it will have a direct impact not only on the security of Kosovo, but on the security of the entire Southeast Europe. Because imagine Kosovo, imagine the region without the existence of the southern flank of NATO. What might become out of us? So we will come to the situation of pre-First World War or pre-First Balkanic Wars. So it's going to be very complex situation. In this case, if something like this happened, then really I'm seeing a nightmare scenario for Europe, first of all, for Balkans, first of all, but also for Europe. And I don't know, really, my imagination is not that much developed to imagine what might happen in this case. And but on the other hand, Kosovo views US as the main security provider in Kosovo, and not only to Kosovo, but for the entire region. We consider people in Kosovo and leadership in Kosovo, I think, considers US as the main guarantor of the security and stability of the entire region. So this is not only limited to Kosovo. And because of it, not because of Greenland, but because of the crisis that firstly occurred in Ukraine, and it is right now spreading all around, Kosovo has started a program of substantial armament. So the government is trying to buy weapons, and fortunately, so far, this goes in line with the US government line, but also is supported and by Germany and by Turkey mainly. So these are three partners from whom we are buying weapons recently. On the other hand, Vučić has committed to increase the military budget to 2.5 billion euros for this year, which is huge, and it's going to be bigger than all countries of the Western Balkans taken together. So and this security competition is bringing the region to the logic of security dilemma, and I think that this is one of the key issues which has to be addressed by European Union as well, not only by NATO, but then by European Union, because all efforts related to European integration might fall if security wins over the rationale of economic cooperation and good neighborly relations. So that's it.
Okay, but just a brief follow-up. If we look at the suspension of the strategic dialogue, were there concrete actions defined that would be performed by the government to lift this suspension?
Oh, well, no, not so far, not because the position of US is very clear. So if you want to resume the dialogue, you have to fulfill, or at least to show the progress in fulfillment of Brussels already agreements. So
Okay.
that's it. It's a very strict. It is written in the Defense Act of the United States, and right now, and U.S. supports a lot, and Kosovo's NATO's path, which is also stated in the Defense Act. So there is a commitment in security sector, but the position of U.S. is also clear on the other issue, and that is that they are not going to be involved in the state building or nation building. Not only in Kosovo, but and elsewhere in the region and worldwide.
Okay. Thank you, Lulzim. Miodrag, if we look at the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and we've already touched upon this, it's been very difficult in the past, also when it comes to implementation of commitments. Now we have a more difficult situation in Belgrade, one that we haven't seen in a while, very big political instability and also economic instability. What do you see for the coming year with the new government in Pristina for the relations to Belgrade?
Well, it wasn't a secret, actually, that the government in Kosovo, the previous one, of course, wasn't really that much committed to the dialogue process. I mean, I'm not putting the blame only on the Kosovo side, of course, equally or almost equally to that. Of course, Belgrade wasn't really also interested that much, of course, in getting a kind of solution, but at least there were some indicators that Belgrade at some point was more cooperative rather than Pristina, you know. However, of course, we have already something which is kind of, inherited actually from the previous government, the mandate. You know, we have Banska, unresolved issue of Banska, unresolved basically when it comes to Milan Radojic, of course, who actually publicly confessed that he was on behalf of Banska attack. Then we have, of course, the ongoing trial, of course, when it comes to the bomb explosion of the Ibn Lepenat's channel, of course, which is a major security threat, of course, and it was assessed by many. And of course, we have a style dialogue, kind of a tick the box dialogue process happening in Brussels without a real substantial progress. So we actually, which means the EU, not we, of course, but the EU has to find a model how to re-energize, of course, this process and how to meaningfully engage both sides basically in the dialogue process. So I hate mentioning this stick and carrot, policy. I mean, I'm really not in favor of that. However, the kind of incentives has to be found for both sides basically when it comes to the dialogue process. When it comes to the Kosovo Serb perspective, I don't tackle Belgrade or Pristina now, but a Kosovo Serb interest, at this point of time, is exactly the dialogue in Brussels. This actually offers the guarantees to the Kosovo Serb community a kind of prospect, of course, and prosperous future. Otherwise, if we see this kind of policy, without any real progress, of course, it will continue of course, of the future government to nurture exactly the same policy which doesn't really go in favor of the Kosovo Serb community. Vučić is struggling with something else. When I mention Vučić, I hate mentioning only President himself without mentioning the government who, by the book and by default, has to be primarily in charge of the dialogue process and of leading the country. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Serbia. And now Serbia is actually having a totally different problems. You mentioned political instability, a long-lasting, more than a year protest, of course, against the government, against corruption, which seriously shakes the stability of the government and shifted the focus from external to internal problems. How to nurture exactly the power in the year to come. I don't expect that Vučić will manage 2027. Rather, I think realistically, we might expect this year elections at some point by end of this year, which is exactly something which gives obviously more priority to Vučić, including Expo, which is highly prioritized on his agenda, rather than having a Kosovo Serbs who already actually lost a lot of safeguards when it comes to the former institutions that obviously were shut down throughout 24, of course, and some of them 25. So all in all, the real guardian of interest for the Kosovo Serb community is exactly the dialogue process. And if we see a minimum sort of improvement in the dialogue process between Belgrade and Pristina, then we will actually also have a kind of positive momentum in Kosovo to extend this positive momentum into the political dialogue between parliamentary parties, because finally we're going to have a functional parliament, I hope. So this will give a hope, basically, that we, at least at two levels, we have a kind of political stability that will obviously offers more space for dealing with substantial topics, not only purely with the politics, but also economical ones, of course, the prospects, etc., etc. But at least whether this is going to happen or not, I'm not 100% sure, because we have an ongoing, we cannot really ignore those crises, an ongoing several different worldwide crises globally. Besides Ukraine, we know that Middle East, Venezuela, the ongoing crisis in Greenland, of course, and obviously with Iran, probably, again, yet another challenges, of course, ahead of us. It does not really put the Kosovo in the spotlight any longer in the center of interest of everyone. So we have to also acknowledge this, to what degree this is going to have a kind of impact to the domestic policy, of course, speaking of the future government towards different processes, not only internally, but also towards the dialogue process. So to conclude, European Union must really find a way out, actually, how to re-energize the dialogue process and have the incentives for both sides, rather than being a kind of, stick and carrot policy, of course, when it comes to the unfulfilled expectations by both. Okay, so let's continue looking to Brussels and talk about this European Union that could actually save the day, Donika. And if we look there, we have a difficult relationship also, because we have the growth plan money that might be lost. We have the measures that are partially lifted. And we have for Kosovo a situation where the progress when it comes to go towards membership is not exactly in its own hands only, because we have the non-recognizers, and progress in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue is also not in its hands only, because we have the government in Belgrade, and we also have, as Miodrag now explained, probably limited interest in Belgrade when it comes to progress there because of other priorities. So asking you for a very brief statement, what can we expect there? How can we see progress in the relationship to Brussels and change?
Look, I mean, it's going to be very complicated, because 2006, I don't see anything happening, because, I mean, Vučić launched elections, and elections keep things on hold. And honestly, I mean, I didn't see any political will from Vučić to engage even in the dialogue. I mean, probably at least Kurti here and there traveled and tried to sort of engage with Sorensen and Kallas. But that was not the case with Vučić, and obviously because the EU sort of also EU narrative against towards Vučić has changed after the protests, and then Kos clearly does not have, the approach of appeasing Vučić, and you could see that. Not maybe it's a bit too late, but at least it's happening. I mean, the EU is not engaged in the Balkans beyond Albania and Montenegro. These are the front runners. There are deadlines to meet. There are things moving forward, and the rest is kind of a backseat approach, which is wrong. And I don't see Brussels being able to re-energize it, because Kallas does not have the mandate, because we know that the member states are the ones that are really important when it comes to making these kind of processes move forward. And Sorensen, with all the due respect, I mean, he is very well knowledgeable when it comes to the Balkans. His appointment was very much welcome, but he cannot do beyond push paper diplomacy because of the mandate that he has. So if Brussels wants to re-energize things, maybe the coalition of the willing that is meeting so many times to discuss Ukraine can expand beyond Ukraine and talk about how can we create synergies between processes, how can we also address more like processes that the EU could actually do something, because let's face it, in Ukraine, the EU is kind of staying out of the table with or without its decision, being its decision. But, you know, the process between Kosovo and Serbia could still be fixed by the EU, but the EU is just not taking the leadership it should. In terms, when it comes to Kosovo and Serbia, I mean, I'm not going to talk about Vučić because similarly to, I mean, we don't want him to live rent-free in our head, and we don't want to, you know, focus so much on what is happening in Serbia. What can happen in Kosovo is simple. What local Serbs have learned is that politics of boycott leads nowhere, because with or without them, Kurti moved forward. So it's good that they have, you know, returned to institutions. Returning Serbs in the judicial and in the Kosovo police will cost a lot of money, because there is vetting processes, there is training, there is recruiting, there is a lot. So this is a lot of resources that have, you know, need to be sort of placed in that process if we want to move it forward. The third one is that Banjska is the elephant in the room, and full stop. If we stop talking about Banjska and stop asking for political responsibility on what happened in Banjska and in Ibor Lepens, is really dangerous, because it sets a very dangerous precedent for, you know, what is going to happen next. Because Lulzim mentioned that, you know, we are arming, everyone is arming, and if these weapons are all wrong in wrong people's hands, it can really backfire. So without addressing the issue of Banjska, we shouldn't be moving forward. And this is something that benefits not only to the government of Kosovo and, you know, people in Kosovo, but also to the Serbs living in Kosovo. The next one is what the US can do and should do. I mean, only if you look at how the US reacted to elections in Kosovo, it was the only embassy in Kosovo that actually said, we welcome the, you know, results of the elections, and we are looking forward to cooperating with the next government, which is not something that any EU member state or the EU has been doing, because obviously they are waiting for the certification of the results. The US has been very unclear as to why there is the suspended strategic dialogue. It was saying because of Kurti's actions in Kosovo, but at that time Kurti was challenging the constitution of Kosovo. There was nothing actively going on in the northern part of Kosovo, and that can change, because, you know, in the National Defense Authorization Act, you know, there was like Kosovo was included. There is this bilateral cooperation. There is a dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, acknowledging the 2023 agreements. So there is a door open between the US and Kosovo should seize it, and Kurti should seize it. So what should happen next is that obviously, if nothing is happening in Brussels, what Kurti can do is reach out to people. And I'm not saying reach out to people, only the Serbs, because, you know, they are also important, but also Albanians are very important in Kosovo. To reach out to people, to talk about the association, to talk about the, you know, the responsibilities that Kurti undertook when he agreed in Brussels and in Ohrid. This is a very good process, a healthy process, an internal dialogue that he could start with his government in order to discuss what are, you know, the repercussions of establishing the association, and if the association potentially requires constitutional changes, will it open a Pandora box? And then we come to challenging the constitution as it is, the Ahtisaari package, because, I mean, if Kurti also, you know, opens the debate of changing the constitution because of the association, maybe there will be other changes made, and for this we have to be prepared. So what Kurti can do is reach out to opposition, reach out to the international community, make sure that the EU is on board, and start the process. Whatever Vučić is doing is Vučić's issue. We can prepare internally and be prepared for the time when the time comes to engage in the dialogue. But so far, I do believe that the door is open. Kurti has made concessions. Kurti has accepted the association, but to ask for guarantees is not a bad thing, because, you know, it's tit for tat. It's really making sure that you make a move, and that move is being guaranteed, at least by your partners, that is not going to backfire. And I think this should be done in a very, you know, trusted sort of environment where Kurti, but also international partners are on the same page and are doing things together rather than separately and unilaterally.
Just on two sentence answer, please. If we look at the growth plan, the decision on growth plan and lifting on measures, is this a done deal, would you say? Because the government then just has to make a decision there now, or is this also still in limbo?
It's not the government, it's the parliament, and you know, this is what Kurti hinted, that the international agreements, because they require for more qualified majority, and this is where he needs the opposition, and this should be a done deal. I mean, unless the opposition is really, you know, like betting on losing entirely in the next elections, then maybe yes, because it's not a Kurti thing, it's national interest thing. And I don't see any problems with it moving forward. What Kurti can do is also reach out to the opposition and make sure that, similarly to Croatia, they have an agreement that whatever happens in the EU integration process, in the EU integration path, should not be blocked by any of the parties, because this is national interest, and the rest we can work with internally. I hope that they will reach out a maturity level to this degree, so that at least, you know, don't obstruct the little things that Kosovo can get in relation to the EU, knowing that it cannot get more at this point, unfortunately. And lastly, on the security issues, Kosovo has been playing the game quite safely. It has maintained its security cooperation with all its partners. Lately, we have seen that Kosovo has engaged bilaterally in defense, which is a trend that we have been seeing across the countries. I mean, you see the trilateral agreement between Albania and Croatia, and you see its cooperation with Turkey, but has maintained very well, very solid cooperation in the security sector with the US, also the UK. So being non-EU or EU partner, Kosovo has navigated quite carefully and well around its NATO partners. And this is something that is quite positive.
Thank you, Donika. We had a very vivid discussion, and we're going to include now, as promised, a bit late, but still, the questions from the audience. And I would like to ask my colleague Victoria, who has collected the questions from the audience and clustered them a bit, to bring them in so we can have a final round of answers. Victoria.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the interesting questions. There have been a lot of questions. A lot of them have already been addressed in the framework of the discussion, so I'm going to focus on those topics who have not been discussed in detail now. So actually, there were questions on sort of the voter base. First of all, because Donika, in your first intervention, you mentioned that international relations and how well Kurti is seen in the international arena is not that important, or was not that important to voters this time. And one question was whether it wasn't maybe the actual relations, but more the clear alignment with the West and its values, which is an important component of what voters like about Kurti. Then a question on the diaspora and whether it's a prejudice maybe to see them as this homogeneous group which supports Kurti and these nationalist and sovereignist his nationalist and sovereignist narratives. And then a lot of questions again on international relations. Of course, what happens if Vučić loses power in Serbia? Then the question whether the lifting of the sanctions by the EU was actually that impactful on the voting results. And then about the US we already discussed. And somebody asked Lulzim particularly if you could explain a little bit more the legal problem of the deputy president of the presidency of the parliament, but I'm not sure whether we will have time for this.
Could I start tackling shortly? Well, diaspora is not homogeneous because we cannot tell how the diaspora, people who travel to Kosovo have voted. I mean, because that's in Kosovo. But those that voted by post and in the embassies, I mean, almost 90% is Vetëvendosje. And this is a sentiment. Again, there is a lot of debate in Kosovo whether diaspora should, participate in the elections or not. And that's, I think, too extreme. The debate should be like whether do we do an electoral reform in a way that diaspora has reserved seats that in many other countries, but then, you know, and elects people who deal with diaspora issues, and then the rest internal issues are, you know, left to the local people. But that's, you know, a completely new debate which should happen in a more constructive way and not the way it is, because now we are antagonizing each other and people are blaming diaspora for electing Kurti, which is not the case, because Kurti would have been, you know, a winner with or without diaspora. And then, you know, like also targeting diaspora, targeting people in the region, and you know, having this, you know, kind of up on their nose approach that, you know, we come here and we decide on who gets to win. You know, this is not a competition, and this debate should be taking place in a different way. It's a very malignant way, the way we're talking to each other in Kosovo, and that has to stop. On the international environment, well, Kurti has made sure, I mean, in Kosovo there is very little, like extremely little chance to have a different alignment internationally, just because, I mean, there is this cooperation with Russia and China, which are the biggest players in the region. It's non-existent for Kosovo. What happened is that Kurti remains a pro-EU person. The pro-EU narrative is there, and the EU has praised for the alignment in the country report as well, which is different from, you know, than, you know, how the way the Kurti was treated. But in the voters' eyes, the EU measures did not matter that much, because the EU measures were the most nonsense decision that were taken against Kosovo, not against Serbia, after the Banjska attack. So they were seen as a very unfair decision. First of all, not directly blamed to Kurti, but rather to, you know, how the EU sort of used this leverage on Kosovo unjustly at that point of time. Because the US dialogue was cancelled, was suspended in a way in which it was not really explained why. So these things Kurti did not even touch upon in the political campaign. He did not even talk about it. The debate was elsewhere, and in a masterful way, he managed for these issues not to be detrimental for his re-election. And this is something that, you know, has to be studied, because as I said before, if another leader would have done or would have been put under the EU measures, or with the US dialogue suspended, they would have been punished way more than Kurti has been. So this is, you know, all in a way, the framing of narrative that we are the victims. The international community is appeasing Vučić, is against Kosovo, is putting pressure on Kosovo, on the association. So the interlink between the international relations and the association, the dialogue with Serbia, and the repercussions for internal functionality of the country have been used in a masterful way, and this is something that should be studied.
Thank you, Donika. Miodrag, would you like to continue, and then Lulzim close us off?
Well, I thought, you know, we already done this, you know, earlier, but anyways, you know, so just to reiterate once again, of course, something which needs to be done, you know, in the current year. This is basically the change of, well, actually, we didn't tackle this during the discussion. This is change of the public actually discourse by the public officials, by the politicians. This has to be treated as the utmost priority of everyone in Kosovo, in Serbia, and particularly in the EU, with zero tolerance, of course, to hate speech, to the harsh narratives, of course, between one another, because you don't expect by basically neither party to compromise with such a strong offensive rhetoric towards one another. This is a kind of basics, nothing to do with the substantial, you know, substance basically of the discussion itself, but rather to a mutual respect, of course, of the counterparts involved in the dialogue process. This is a must, and this is a top priority, not only for the dialogue also in Brussels, but this is also a top priority, of course, when it comes, I'm showing the finger actually towards Pristina, by the way, within the Assembly of Kosovo. We have to restore back the political maturity among the elected politicians and among those that represent the community voice, of course, before the institutions. This is the kind of bottom line. And then we can really start expecting something which we already, of course, at least I said before, basically when it comes to the commitment to the dialogue process, and when it comes to the treatment, of course, of the particularly Kosovo Serb community, which is top priority, of course, for myself and the non-majority communities, of course, in Kosovo. The biggest distrust towards the previous government and the hesitations or reluctance actually towards the future government, which means Kurti government, of course, again, actually comes from the decisions that harm the Kosovo Serb community. This is not only shutting down the institutions that existed before, this is not only access to their salaries, pensions, etc., but the whole package, including the top, of course, things when it comes to the refusal of reintegration of judges and police. Somebody asked here, and I noticed the question actually, how this reintegration of the police could be done. Exactly in the same way it was done in 2014, 13 and 14, and exactly in the same way it was done in North Macedonia after the fight actually of the fighters actually against the North Macedonian government. So law and amnesty actually can resolve vast majority of things, with only one reserve. This cannot apply to those who clearly are actually making an obstacle towards the functionality of the country, towards the interethnic and towards the relations within the Kosovo police and, of course, among the communities as well. This cannot apply to them. And to be frank with you, not really in that particular case. This is a kind of ideal scenario. Not really that all of the policemen will be back to Kosovo or to Kosovo police, but at least only those with a clean track record, of course, that could restore back. Actual situation at present, of course, we have in majority ethnic Kosovo Serb, majority ethnic environment, of course, we have majority police officers that comes from the ethnic Kosovo Albanian ethnic community who don't, vast majority of them, they don't speak Serbian language, they fail to communicate with local communities. So we need the practical solution before any political agenda of anyone. So this is my concluding remark to that.
Thank you, Miodrag, and over to Lulzim.
Thank you very much. So I will start with diaspora, a few words about it. Diaspora in Kosovo is nationalistic. So the views of diaspora are very nationalistic, and those views have been the same more or less throughout the recent history of Kosovo. And this is like very similar like with the diaspora of Croatia or North Macedonia or something like this, because diasporas of the region are usually more nationalistic than people who do live in their own countries. So this is a kind of pattern. And they have voted for Kurti because Kurti has worked with the nationalistic agenda, sovereignist agenda, the majority of them. We cannot change this. And, well, perhaps we have to think about changing the law in elections in Kosovo. And this has not only to deal with diaspora, but it has to deal also with the government, how the government and let's say behaves in the pre-election campaign. I think that the best model for Kosovo could be Macedonian model, North Macedonian model. So having a technical government 100 days before the elections. And this can create, institutional stability and would prevent the misuse of public money for election purposes. I think that we should do that as soon as possible, because the last election campaign and how the resources of the public resources have been used by Kurti are unprecedented in our recent history of elections. The second point, regarding the EU sanctions. So I have said that this was cherry on the cake for Kurti, not that lifting of the sanctions have determined the result of elections. But it was the cherry on the cake to create a clear momentum for him by not having even obstacles or being treated badly by the European Union. And regarding the strategic dialogue, I think that it was clear why the planning of the strategic dialogue has been suspended. It was because Kurti was testing the limits of the constitutional order of Kosovo, which is based on multi-ethnicity. So that was the reason. But resuming of the dialogue now would require progress in implementation of the Brussels Audit agreements. So the conditions are right now different from the cause that of suspending the dialogue. So these are two things, are not the same. Then the last thing, when it comes to the police in the north. Right now, there are an integration of the police and judges. For judges and prosecutors, there is no legal problem for their integration, because once they apply to come back, they will be permitted to come back. I know that there is a kind of resistance. It was a resistance by the former Minister of Justice for this option, but the legal option is there. Regarding police, this is much difficult. And as far as I know, and this is from EU officials, is that there are around 200 policemen belonging to Serbian community who are serving in the north of Kosovo. So in the north of Kosovo, the police requirements are for personnel are around for 300. And as far as I know, there is no stomach in EU to push the government for the reintegration of the former policemen. So this I have to tell, because this is how it looks like from the current point of view. Things might change in the future, but I'm not seeing that EU has any will to push this. And this reintegration, which is actually forbidden by law. This can be done by lex specialis, but I'm not dismissing this as the case. Personally, I was for this in the very beginning, so to go through vetting system and all of that. But it seems that for now, this is looks quite impossible. And so that's it. I don't know were there any other questions or not.
Thank you, Lulzim. Thank you all for these great insights into the current situation in Kosovo after the elections. I think I'm now a bit more optimistic when it comes to the politics and the question of presidential elections and things like this. And I don't know, looking forward to see what's going to happen on the policy side after you all were so pessimistic, or rather pessimistic, but let's see what can happen. I think we will all look out to the next dates, which is the certification of results, the constitution of parliament, election of speaker, election of government, and then presidential elections in April. So for now, thank you, Donika, thank you, Lulzim, thank you, Miodrag. Thank you all in the audience for your interest in this event. If you would like to have another event even this week on Southeast Europe, we're going to have a book presentation live in Munich with Professor Karlik and her new book, Balkan Odyssey, in the Seidel Villa in Munich. You can still register for this. Otherwise, I wish you a nice evening and looking forward to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the very best. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.